So let's go to the chat box. Are there any questions here? Okay, so Caitlin has left us as well.
She announced it previously that she had a different commitment. Yeah.
Okay. I can't see any questions. Would anybody like to turn on the cameras and ask a question? No. Can you see any questions, Dragana?
No, I'm looking through it. I mean, there's a lot of, let's say, a lot of activities in the chat, but it's all been, let's say, it's solved already in the chat. So participants have Sylvia, yes.
Hello, I'm Sylvia Vilches. I'm a member of the ICORSA board, and I'm in the US in a research position. It's been a very vast discussion, so it's a little hard to come up with a question. But what I'm really intrigued by is all the different initiatives around the world, and the different perspectives of what's urgent. Hamila, I was really struck by that initiative in Salta, documenting the pregnancy rates, if I understood the potential for pregnancy, and the unknowing participation. And I know where Salta is. For those who don't know, it's a lower resource province in the north west of Argentina, in the base of the mountains south of Brazil, and so I can imagine that might come with some kind of incentive. I would imagine those people are incentivized, are they?
Yeah, so well, the full project involves like surveying vulnerable communities from that region and generating rates in terms of the probability either for teenage pregnancy and school dropout. That has raised several concerns from civil society regarding the preservation of participants' data and information, and also their autonomy in terms of their choices. But at the same time, this is the type of initiative, I guess that was part of our conversation previously in the breakout groups, that attempt, based on a rhetoric of inclusion, to basically expand new forms of control, because in the end what you have is a validation for state intervention in these types of cases, in terms of offering some types of assistance, and that's the type of benefits or incentives that you might imagine, offering specific assistance or things like that. And at the same time is something that in all the cases that we analyzed, this is not a case that Derechos Digitales is specifically analyzed, but I will share a paper that describes this case in detail. But as all the cases that we analyzed, this is a case in which the state is promoting the use of technology. So in several cases, as well as in the Chilean case, which is involving the use of processing of data by of minors to also predict some forms of vulnerability, they barely have the opportunity to consent with or not the processing of such data. Is like a derivative use of data that is already available at the public sector. And what you will have in the places where you have data protection normatives in place is that there is an exception, a public interest exception for consent in the use of certain types of information for public policies and several other cases that would allow them to do such types of derivative use of data in these cases. I'm not sure if I correctly or if I answered the question, but I wanted to give a bit of more context to this initiative, and I'm sharing the link of a paper that describes a bit more of this initiative that is being implemented in Salta, but is being expanded to other countries, including at the national levels.
One can imagine a lot of initiatives that might fly under the banner of public health or public good that gather this kind of information, but I cannot imagine that Microsoft is involved if there's not some kind of reward at the end. And yeah, very concerning. There's
A reward to Microsoft, you mean?
Yes.
Itself?
Mhm.
Well, and these are the things that are basically the most complicated things about these public-private partnerships that are being implemented here in the region. You don't have many information on what are the conditions for sharing and accessing information. So we would imagine that they can benefit from training systems and algorithms on that information, for instance, but you don't have enough public information on that. You have a Microsoft press release that describes the initiative also. I try to find it and I can share it here also.
I think the issue on the data retention is really concerning. Every time I go through the airport and see the private corporations that are doing fast processing tickets, what they're really doing is collecting AI. Now you pay them to give you fast access through the airport, but if it's not a governmental entity, and it's a totally different issue when it's a governmental entity because different governments have different policies about what they're doing with their data. But yeah, it's very concerning. Thank you for sharing. There's a very interesting gender issue there because you're working with young women. Yeah. Anyways.
Okay, thank you. It's a pity we don't have Abhishek here. Abhishek sits on the Responsible AI Ethics Review Board of Microsoft. So maybe he could have addressed some of those concerns you raised about Microsoft involvement and that there being a financial reward at the end of it.
And just to add one comment to that great point that Yamila brought, is also showcasing an example of techno-solutionism where maybe the solution for teen pregnancy comes from other policies that are not necessarily related to something developing a very expensive tech solution instead of underfunding social policies, as it's also happening in the region. There's government cuts on welfare policies, and we're then investing in these AI data solutions that might bring magic solutions to these issues.
I can imagine in the US with the turn at the state level to more conservative legislation around pregnancy and termination of pregnancy, that this kind of AI surveillance could be very problematic.
Exactly. And if I may jump in again, I don't want to concentrate conversation, and I'll be happy to hear Gabriela also if this is some forms of things that you have seen in the African context also. But the way in which this partners happens is with direct collaboration from business corporation, either global corporations or local corporations sometimes, and sometimes even in coalition with academic institutions and state entities. So you have this form of the rhetoric of experimenting, of pilot projects, and they don't go through a proper procurement process. And that we have observed in almost all the cases that we analyze right now, and even in the case of the COVID-19 app that I didn't explore that much. And in that case, we analyzed 16 apps in 14 countries. That was the model, and in that particular case, what you had was an argument that you had an urgency, that things should be moving faster, and you wouldn't have time for proper public discussion and citizen oversight of this. But so this is a very concerning trend, and that's precisely one of the things we're trying to call attention when we think about the implementation of these technologies at the public sector, because that can be a way in which private companies can achieve more data, can obtain more data. And of course, we're concerned on that from a perspective of data colonialism that was presented in the beginning also.
Yeah, to jump in there, I mean, I was actually just trying to find a piece I did on COVID technologies in South Africa and in the region that were developed. You know, some of them low tech solutions, some of them under the auspices of AI, but basically that, you know, a lot of that procurement revealed what I call, you know, the existing digital hegemonies that exist and are a really important dynamic for understanding the development of technology in the region, which, as you said, when certainly we see happens a lot in public-private partnerships of different forms. But they, you know, they're interesting dynamics, for instance, to development funds within those contexts, which are often difficult to track, interestingly. But yeah, that on the flip side, I do see an opportunity, like I said, through, you know, through understanding the necessity for public-private partnerships, given the capacity shortages that we have, to rethink how you can configure those relationships and to use procurement and contracting as an opportunity to create positive obligations on companies implementing these technologies that you don't get to do in, you know, an AI project that's completely developed by a private sector company. You know, I mean, we've obviously got emerging data protection frameworks and data governance frameworks which apply to companies in the region, emerging. You know, there are a couple of countries with data protection laws loosely modeled on GDPR kind of protections and those kinds of things. But, you know, for some of the more practical instruments that I think really make a difference, like a social impact assessments and those kinds of things, I really think it's an interesting opportunity to think about the role of public procurement in that context. Yeah, because I mean, 0.6% of our public service has digital literacy. I mean, you know, and we need local development of these technologies to avoid the kinds of digital colonialism that are having such a, you know, strong impact on what our current AI future. So
that's a really great point, and I want to not talk too much. So, but I have looked at partnership agreements in Canada's far north around resource extraction. And one of the evolutions that's been led by Indigenous communities in the north, the subarctic area, is to negotiate access to land that is within the Indigenous purview in exchange for certain kinds of benefits. Some of it is transportation in and out of extremely remote communities, so that community members can ride for free on company planes, but it's also quotas around employment or training or opportunities that are privileged or given first to the rural communities. And so they negotiate these ancillary benefits, which help to create sustainable economic future for the communities without impacting the. So it's a very interesting model, and maybe some of that might apply. It's a great point about the P3s, because we're not going to be able to change that economic structure right now.
Can I just come in at this point and we can continue. I feel we are already moved further into the final panel, and that is a very good thing. So it's a great, inspiring conversation. But I would nevertheless a quick Caesar at this point to first of all say thank you to Megan and all speakers, including Kaitlin, who now left, for your very interesting and inspiring presentations of your work. Before we go into the final session and can maybe speak about synergies between the different projects and organizations and the work that you do, I think we had one question about a collective photo.